Since the early time that we as humans have really started to understand what death means and why it happens, we've tried to work out ways to reverse it. And that's come from anywhere from putting somebody in a machine to rotate them back and forth, to throwing them over the back of a horse, to throwing them over a bucket, to putting them in some other machine and letting it squeeze on their chest in an effort to maintain blood flow while we're trying to restart the heart. For most people and in most situations, modern resuscitation is typified by the chest compression. And it's been that way. External chest compression has been the gold standard of things that you would do if you're trying to bring somebody back to life for the past half century or so. Now, there's a lot of magic numbers in cardiac arrest resuscitation, but the number in terms of chest compressions is 80%. If you're doing chest compressions 80% of the time while the person doesn't have a pulse, you're considered to be doing at least part of a high-quality resuscitation. And you may say, well, that seems kind of simple. Certainly we're doing chest compressions 80% of the time. What you actually find is that we tend to not, and it's actually kind of hard to reach that 80% mark. Where are we spending time doing other things? Well, for example, ultrasound. Lots of folks are doing some kind of limited echo or a rush exam or something during CPR. Without ultrasound, when it's been studied, the time for pauses was about 11 seconds if you did not use ultrasound. The average pause when using ultrasound was about 17 seconds. So we've gone up by about a third, almost doubled the amount of time that we're spending off the chest not doing CPR if we use ultrasound. Airway is the same way, and everybody kind of knows this, especially when we were doing airway before breathing or circulation. Even when you're at modern goals of doing chest compressions primarily, we still pause about 109 seconds on average when, again, it's been studied, for airway maneuvers. And that 109 seconds is, again, the average. It goes up to 8 minutes. So 8 minutes of time when we could be doing chest compressions are instead spent sitting there, not doing chest compressions, not getting blood throughout the body because we're messing around with the airway. There's other things that affect it too, though, and one of the most prominent ones is what's built into the CPR cycle itself. The pulse check happens every 2 minutes, and it happens like clockwork. We always do a pulse check every 2 minutes, right? How long do we actually spend off the chest? Well, here's an example, and this is sort of the way that an average, relatively speedy pulse check actually goes. If you actually watch, you'll find that most of your pulse checks take about this amount of time. And of note, even though he does some chest compressions, it takes about 12 chest compressions to get back to actually blood flowing throughout the body. So how much time was that? That took 21 seconds. And again, that's probably an average amount of time for most resuscitations in the emergency department. On the floor, it can be even more. We tend to be a little bit less in EMS, although they certainly run that same risk. Why is that important? Well, because for every 5 seconds that you spend doing a pulse check, or every 5 seconds that you spend off the chest, after the initial 5 seconds, your odds ratio of survival goes down by about 20%. So the chance that you will come back to life with good neurological function goes down by about 20% after every 5 seconds or so. And you find that we eat up those 5 seconds awfully quickly. However, we can do it better. It is possible to actually do a pulse check in under 5 seconds, not just the 10 that the AHA talks about. And here's an example of the team doing it. Total off CPR time's right around 5 seconds or so. So how do you make that happen? Well, number one, you have to have a plan. You know, the pulse check is going to happen every 2 minutes. We know it's going to happen every 2 minutes. It's probably the one thing that is actually the most standardized throughout the whole resuscitation. We know it's going to happen. Why do we not have a good plan for who's going to do what during it? If I tell you every 2 minutes that I'm going to punch you in the face and I make good on that claim, how many times are you just going to stand there and let me punch you in the face before you actually do something about it? So we have to get prepped before all this stuff happens. Now, part of this comes in the time that we are doing the resuscitation itself and we're not actually thinking about the pulse check. Now, here's a pretty standard resuscitation. Anybody who's been up on the floor especially or down in the ED knows that this is what it looks like. And as Chris Doty would say, look at all these people fiddle-fucking around. Look at them all standing there. Nobody's really got a plan for what's next. Nobody's thinking that, oh my gosh, we've got 15 seconds till we're going to do a pulse check and getting set up for it because this is the most dangerous time for us. We're all just sort of living in the moment, waiting for somebody to say, time for a pulse check, and then we're going to try to do something about it. So here's another resuscitation, and if you notice the marked difference in this one, there is actually not somebody standing around not doing anything. Everyone has a purpose. This guy's on the chest, this guy's on the airway, this guy's on the ultrasound, this guy's on the monitor. And everybody's going to maintain those roles so that we don't have a bunch of people to get out of the way. Of note, too, everybody's got a different job. The compressor is just doing chest compressions. The guy that's doing the airway is focused on the airway. The guy that's doing the monitor is focused on the monitor. And the guy on the ultrasound is focused on the ultrasound. So let's talk real quick about the timing of the resuscitation itself. You've got about a minute and a half before you have to start getting ready before the next pulse check, or else it's going to come up and bite you, and that time will get eaten up very quickly. So what I like to hear is 30 seconds till pulse check, 10 seconds till pulse check, and then the pulse check itself. It's technically a rhythm check, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and then I want to know when the rhythm check actually comes itself. I've got different things that need to happen at each step. So at 30 seconds, we're going to basically start getting ready for the pulse check. Anybody that's doing a non-essential task, if you can put it down now, or if you're not going to have it completed by the time we get to the pulse check, go ahead and do that. Go ahead and stop and get out of the way so that everybody else that needs to do something during that rhythm check can actually get up there. So we continue to do chest compressions. We've got our guy in the airway who's all of a sudden paying attention because we're getting close. We go ahead and bring in the other two folks that we'll need, i.e. somebody to do the ultrasound and then our next chest compressor as well. The guy in the airway is again going to perk up his ears because he's going to keep on bagging every 5 to 6 seconds or so, but he now needs to pay attention because he's going to have to get out of the way in a minute. And the guy on the monitor knows and takes that as his cue that I need to start getting ready, I need to start watching the monitor, and I need to be ready to charge it and to push that button when directed to. So at 30 seconds, we've got time to start making all this stuff happen and to start getting in position and to start moving people around as we need to. 10 seconds is the next time when I really want to hear about what timing there is, because this is the time when we're really going to push stuff into action and we're going to be ready to jump when the pulse check actually needs to happen. So here's everybody resuscitating, and you notice at 10 seconds what will actually happen is everyone moves into position. The next chest compressor is going to get up there and get ready to go. The guy on the ultrasound is going to go ahead and put the ultrasound probe on the belly, and the guy who is running the monitor is going to go ahead and charge the defibrillator up and put his hand on the button and get ready to go after he's directed to. So that's 10 seconds of prep, and that 10 seconds will fly by, so be careful. The next thing you're probably going to hear is pulse check, and everybody tends to interpret this as, oh my god, we got to stop because now's the pulse check. What it actually means is that this is the time when we should go ahead and do one. Let's activate our plan. Here's the plan. We're not just going to stop. When we hear time for a pulse check, we're going to give it a minute because the guy that's in charge is no longer the team leader. It's no longer the person keeping time. It is this guy right here who's doing the chest compressions, because we don't want him to stop if we're not in a good position, and we don't want to pull him off if he doesn't have a replacement. So the chest compressor is really the guy that's going to run when we do the pulse check. He may start counting down and say, this is when we're going to do a pulse check at 1 minute and 15 seconds. And that's okay because it's up to him. He's the guy that determines when we stop because he's doing the chest compressions. And he's going to tell us when the chest compressions are coming because when he hears rhythm check, he's going to count down and telegraph to everyone else in the room that he's about to stop. And that will not only give him a definite time, that will tell everybody else, hey, at the end of this 10 seconds, this 10 count, I'm going to need to be either watching the monitor, or I'm going to squeeze the bag the last time, or I'm going to need to be getting ready to do the next set of chest compressions. Now that sort of alludes to the really important part of this, because there's about 20 things that have to get done during that little period where we're calling it a pulse check, and they all have to happen relatively quickly, and so we need lots of people all coordinated to do it. And this is where the idea of the pit crew comes in. So you may have seen pit crews at Indy races previously. The idea is these guys are all very practiced, and they're all lined up, and they're going to switch out the tires and the fins and give this guy maybe a little bit of gas, all in the space of about 4 seconds or so of actual stop time. And how do they do that? Well, they practice like hell, that's one thing, but also they have a really distinct plan. And everybody has a specific job or a specific set of jobs, and they do it the exact same way every time, and nobody does anybody else's job. So you literally know where everybody else's hands are based on what stage of the pit stop we're actually in. And obviously this isn't auto racing, but you kind of get the idea that maybe there's a set of things that we could adopt to sort of do this a little bit smoother. So here's the way that it might work. When you're in the arrest and somebody says pulse check, and the compressor counts down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and steps back as you see Jake doing there. Each person's now got a role to do. The guy doing the ultrasound, and we'll just start there, is now going to push the clip button on the ultrasound machine and just record a clip. He's not going to interpret the image. He's not going to say, hold on a second. He is just going to take pictures as it goes, and whatever pictures you get are what we have. The person who's doing chest compressions next is going to take this opportunity to go ahead and get up there, put their hands above the chest, and be ready to immediately start doing chest compressions as soon as we either say no pulse, continue compressions, or as soon as a shock is delivered. And they're not going to wait for anything else. They're not going to look at the monitor. They're not going to look at the patient otherwise. Their job is to get ready for chest compressions at this point. And that's all that they're going to do. At the same time, the person who just did chest compressions is likewise not going to feel for a pulse. They're not going to look at the monitor. They're going to get back and get the hell out of the way, because that's their job right now, to let the next person through, because we can't do the next part unless they move out of the way. The person doing the monitor is going to have their hand on the shock button, and this may be a non-shockable rhythm, and that's okay, but we're ready to go because he pre-charged the defibrillator at the 10-second mark. And he's going to be monitoring and watching the monitor and thinking very intently, what am I going to see? If it's a squiggly line, we're going to shock. If it's not a squiggly line, we're not going to shock. And he is going to be ready to make that decision. And being focused on that particular question, whether this is a shockable rhythm, i.e. a squiggly line, or not a squiggly line, actually will speed up the process by about 3 or 4 seconds at a time. As soon as the person that's doing chest compressions gets to their 0 or their 10, if they go 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, on the 0 mark, the person doing the bagging or managing the airway is going to give one squeeze of the bag and then immediately get back. They're not going to wait around. They're not going to look at the monitor. They're not going to feel for a pulse. Their job is to give one squeeze as soon as that person says 1, and then get out of the way. Again, because the only thing they're going to do by being there, they're not going to bag during the pulse check. What they're going to do is hold up somebody from pushing the defibrillator button if they're still touching the patient. So again, when you hear 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, if you're bagging the patient, put the bag down and get out of the way and make sure that you're not in the way so that the defibrillation can happen. So that's the way this all looks. And again, your pulse check at that point should take no more than about 10 seconds or so. By the way, I've been calling it a pulse check just for ease and because that's been what's ingrained in my head for about 20 years. It's not a pulse check. We got to get away from the pulse check. Even AHA, who most of us would say sort of is the more conservative arm, has gotten away from pulse check. It's a rhythm check, because if it's a shockable rhythm, you're going to shock. And you don't care if they've got a pulse or not, because they're not going to have a pulse. If they're VF, they're not going to have a pulse. Honestly, if they're VT, they're probably not going to have a pulse, and it doesn't really matter because the harm is not really there. So go ahead and just defibrillate if you see either of those two squiggly lines. Likewise, asystole is never going to have a pulse. Unless the pads come off and you see a flat line, then that person is not going to have a pulse. There's no reason to feel for a pulse. You're only going to get confused. Just get back on the chest in that case. Only if you see PEA should you be doing a rhythm check. Now, we can get into that later, see a future video, but that's the idea behind the pulse check and the rhythm check. We are not doing a pulse check anymore. You don't need to have your hands on the patient. Start off by looking at a monitor, and then if you see what could be a pulsatile rhythm, you can put your hand on the patient at that point. So if you'll notice, these guys go ahead and do the shock, and then immediately jump back on CPR. It's worth noting, even though this should have been drilled into you in ACLS class, that there is no pause following a shock. There is no re-rhythm check. It is jump back on CPR and do another 2 minutes. Now, if you got some other reasons the person wakes up a minute and a half into it, you can, of course, stop. But you should not pause in between the shock and the next set of CPR for a rhythm check or anything like that. So let's see that all again one more time, just to kind of hash out the points as we go along. At 30 seconds to a rhythm check, we're going to get everyone clear of the patient. We're going to identify the next chest compressor. We're going to start planning for our next pulse check. And team leader, if that means you need to assign some new roles or explain something, this is the time to do it. In terms of the ultrasound, we're going to get set up and ready to go. And anybody with a non-essential task is going to start getting away from the patient at this point. So the next thing is, again, 10 seconds. We're going to use this opportunity to charge the defibrillator. We're going to get the next chest compressor up in position. We're going to get whoever's checking the pulse potentially in position, which is usually going to be the team leader, and the ultrasound on the abdomen. To run through what you do one more time when you hear rhythm check. Number one, everybody is basically off the patient, except for maybe the guy doing the ultrasound who's already in position but is ready to leave the patient at a moment's notice. When you get to the actual rhythm check, the guy doing chest compressions is going to count down 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And when he gets to 1, the person doing the bagging is going to do one squeeze on the bag, and then both he and the chest compressor are going to get away from the patient and make some space because we don't want to be in the way if we need to defibrillate. At this point, the question is, what do you do if it's a shockable versus a non-shockable rhythm? Well, if it's shockable, it's fairly simple. Everyone's going to be hands-off already because that's what we've already established. The person doing the ultrasound, as soon as they hear shockable rhythm, is going to just get out of the way because there's nothing useful they're going to find. Since everyone is already hands-off, we're going to push the shock button and then jump back on immediate chest compressions. And that way we're going to reduce our pulse checks in a shockable rhythm down to 3 or 4 seconds instead of 20 or 25. Now, non-shockable rhythms are a little bit of a different story, and this is necessarily going to eat up a little bit of time, but we can still do it efficiently and we can still make sense of it. You do everything else up to this point the exact same way. You have everyone in the same positions. The only thing you need to do now is know that if you see what could be a perfusing rhythm, this is the time to check a pulse. And who should check a pulse? I'm going to say it's the team leader, because that person has not been doing anything with his hands, and he is the most likely to be in a good position. He's also going to be the one to call for a defibrillation if that needs to occur. So all he has to worry about is getting his own hands off the patient and not 10 other people's, so that this can be done safely. So it's a non-shockable rhythm. One person is going to feel at the carotid, and you have to feel at the carotid. The person doing the ultrasound is going to go ahead and take a clip, and then we're going to jump back on doing immediate chest compressions. And by the way, the ultrasound could actually help you here, because if you set the timer on the ultrasound to take a 5 or 6 second clip, then you know that at 5 or 6 seconds, you need to get back on the chest if you haven't felt a pulse already. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb for the most part. So let's watch the whole thing again one more time, start to finish, essentially without commentary, just to kind of pick it all out. A 3-second pulse check is a thing of beauty. And if we can make all our pulse checks like that instead of the 20 seconds that we tend to spend on folks, I think we'll see a lot more survivors and a lot of more folks walking out of the hospital neurologically intact. It's easy to get down on this cardiac arrest stuff because we're going to have many more deaths than survivors. And we're going to work really hard on a lot of people that will end up brain dead, or maybe even an organ donor if they're lucky, or maybe just never walk out of the emergency department and will end up telling their family that, yeah, they died this evening. Sometimes it seems like, why are we doing this? We're investing so many resources into this, and nobody ever survives. And it's true that many people don't, but some people do. And if we can pull those 1 or 2 people back a month, and hopefully it's more than that, but say that you work and one of the arrests that you work in a month comes back, that's one person who we would have been having a funeral for otherwise. That's one family that we don't have to tell that their son or their daughter or their mom or their dad died this evening. It's worth it for that. This is what we're here to do. This is the stuff that actually makes a difference to folks. Yeah, most folks that come to the emergency department are going to survive anyway, and they may live with pain, but they're going to live. These are the folks where we actually have a chance to intervene on them, and just the little things that we can change in the way that we do things, with no other equipment, with no other drugs, with nothing else fancy, with no more research, just change the way that we do things just a tiny bit. we may be able to pull out 5 or 6 more survivors a month. And 5 or 6 out of 40 people may not seem like an awful lot, but for those 5 or 6, it's a big deal. So keep your head up. Remember, it's the simple things that save lives, it's the basics that bring people back. And we'll see you around the emergency department.